The morning air was heavy with the kind of silence that only follows heartbreak. The sky was pale gray, like even the clouds were grieving. I stood near the casket holding Danny's hand as the pastor's voice echoed softly through the church walls. My husband John lay there still and quiet in a dark suit that never belonged to him. He hated suits. He loved his old denim jacket and the smell of sawdust after a long day at work. But now he was dressed for goodbye. People filled the room, family, friends, neighbors from down the street, all whispering gentle words of comfort. I nodded, but heard nothing. It felt like the world was moving without me. The sound of sniffles and shuffling feet faded into a dull hum. I just stared at the man I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. John was my calm. He was the kind of man who made broken things work again. He built houses for a living, but he built people too, with kindness, with patience, with love. He could fix a leaky roof or a broken heart and somehow make it look easy. We had been together 15 years, and every single one of them had felt like home. They said it was a car accident. They said the truck flipped on a slippery curve and burst into flames. The police came to the house with sad eyes and soft voices. I remember the way they looked at me like I might break, and maybe I did a little that day. I held Danny close during the service. His little fingers clutched the edge of my dress. He was only 7, too young to understand loss, but old enough to feel it. I wanted to be strong for him, but my hands kept shaking. I could still smell John's cologne faint on my sleeve from the last time he hugged me goodbye. He had kissed my forehead that morning, said he'd be home by dinner, but dinner never came. The pastor said words about peace and heaven and eternal rest, and everyone bowed their heads in prayer. I tried to close my eyes, but my heart was screaming inside. I wanted to tell John I wasn't ready to let him go. I wanted to believe he could still hear me somehow. And then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I thought maybe someone was texting about flowers or food for after the service. I didn't even want to check, but something in me did. I took it out, and when I saw the message, my knees almost gave out. It said, "I am still alive. Trust no one." I froze. The world tilted. My eyes blurred. I read it again and again. The number was unknown, but the last 4 digits were the same as the work phone John used whenever he was out of town. I could feel my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I looked around. Everyone was praying, eyes closed, heads bowed. No one saw me shaking. My first thought was that it had to be a cruel joke. But who would do that at a funeral? My second thought was worse. What if it was true? What if my husband wasn't dead? What if someone had made me believe he was? I slipped the phone back into my coat. My hands were ice cold. I could barely breathe. I whispered under my breath, "John," and the sound of his name almost broke me. After the service, people came to hug me, say kind words, talk about John's smile, his generosity, his laugh. I nodded, smiled, thanked them, but my mind was miles away. My heart raced every time my phone vibrated in my pocket. I was afraid to look, afraid not to. That night, when Danny was asleep, I sat by the window with that message open on my phone. I read it until the letters blurred. I wanted to reply, but I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know if it was him. Finally, I typed, "Who is this?" and pressed send. An hour passed, no answer. I thought maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe grief had twisted reality. Then at 2 a.m., another message came. It said, "Do not go to the police. They are part of it." I dropped the phone. My chest tightened. I didn't know what to believe anymore. I texted back, "If this is John, please tell me something only you would know." I waited nothing. Then another message appeared. "Remember the blue swing in the backyard?" I gasped. He built that swing for Danny's 5th birthday. No one else knew that detail, not even our neighbors. It had to be him. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive somewhere, anywhere to find him, but there was no location, no clue, only fear. I spent the rest of the night pacing the room, trying to make sense of everything. Was he running from someone? Had he faked his death? Was I in danger? Why would the police be involved? By morning, I knew only one thing I couldn't tell anyone. Not my sister, not my best friend, not even the cops. The message said, "Trust no one," and my gut told me it was right. When the sun rose, I packed Danny's lunch, drove him to school, and smiled like nothing was wrong inside. I was shaking with every heartbeat. Every car that passed by, every shadow in the mirror made me nervous. I checked the rearview mirror again and again, wondering if someone was following me. That night, another message came. It said, "They think I am dead, but they are watching you. Stay calm. I will explain soon." My hands trembled so hard I could barely hold the phone. I whispered, "John, where are you? Please come home, please." And for the first time since the funeral, I felt a spark of something stronger than fear, hope. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in the dark, watching the driveway through the window, half expecting him to walk through the gate and half afraid of who might come instead. And that was how it began, the moment I realized my husband's death was not an ending. It was the beginning of something I never could have imagined that night. I kept hearing the same sound again and again, the wind pressing softly against the windows and the ticking of the clock. I sat on the couch, holding my phone close to my chest. I wanted another message. I needed to know what was happening, but the screen stayed silent. I whispered to the dark, "John, please be safe. Please tell me what to do." Morning came too slow, the sunlight felt too bright, and the house too quiet. Danny was still asleep, his face calm and soft the way children sleep when they still believe the world is kind. I kissed his forehead and went to make coffee. My hands were shaking so bad I spilled half of it on the counter. I cleaned it up. But my thoughts were everywhere. If John was alive, where was he? If someone had lied about the crash, then who could I trust? The police had shown me a report, the photos, the burned truck. I had seen a body at the funeral home. But his face was so damaged. I never kept watching me with those big eyes that saw too much. When he went to bed, I went through John's things, his wallet, his papers, his tool bag. I found nothing strange until I opened his work jacket. There was a folded piece of paper in the inside pocket. It had a phone number written on it, and the word safe. I felt a chill. I called the number from my second phone. There was no answer, just a soft voice on the recording that said, "Leave a message if you know the truth." I hung up quick. My heart raced so fast I had to sit down. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was another message from the same number that had texted before. It said, "Don't call that number again. They are watching you." I wanted to cry, but no tears came. I typed, "Please, I found your note. Tell me what to do." A few seconds later, he replied, "There is a storage locker key in the toolbox. Look under the tray." I ran to the garage, opened his red metal box, and lifted the tray. My hands found cold metal, a small silver key with the number 2117 engraved on it. I sat on the floor staring at it for a long time. That key was real. It wasn't grief or imagination. It was proof. I checked the address printed on the key tag. It belonged to a storage facility 20 minutes from our house. I couldn't wait till morning. I needed to go now. I left Annie asleep with our kind neighbor, Mrs. Hill, promising I'd be back soon. She didn't ask questions, just smiled sadly and said, "Take care, honey." The drive felt endless. Every car behind me looked suspicious. Every light felt too bright. My palms were sweating. When I parked outside the rows of metal doors, I found number 27, and my hands shook as I turned the key. The door creaked open. Inside was darkness and the smell of oil and dust. I turned on my phone flashlight and gasped. There was John's old blue backpack, his laptop, and a small box taped shut with my name written on top. I opened it slowly. Inside were pictures of him with people I had never seen, maps of highways, lists of names, and one photo that made my blood run cold. It was of John standing next to a man. I recognized it was Officer Miller, the same policeman who told me about his death. I sank to my knees, whispering, "Why, John, why didn't you tell me what was happening?" The phone buzzed again. "You found it. Good. Now listen carefully. They will come for that box. Leave now." I slammed the storage door shut, locked it, ran back to the car, and sped away. My heart pounded. I could see headlights in the mirror, maybe following, maybe not. I didn't care. I just drove faster till I reached home. I parked, turned off the lights, and sat there in the dark, breathing hard. I knew then that everything was real. My husband was alive, and someone dangerous didn't want me to find him. I looked up at our house, at the soft glow of the lamp in Danny's window, and whispered, "I will find you, John, whatever it takes. I will bring you home the night after I found the box." I could not close my eyes. Every time I tried, I saw that picture of John standing beside the officer who told me he was gone. My heart kept asking the same question: why would he lie, and why would John trust him? When the sun came up, the world looked the same, but nothing felt the same. I drove Danny to school and promised myself I would act normal, but my hands kept gripping the wheel too tight. I kept checking the mirror. There was a black car a few lengths behind me. It stayed there through every turn. I told myself maybe it was just going the same way. But when I pulled into the school parking lot, it slowed, then turned away. My stomach felt heavy with fear. At work, I tried to smile like everything was fine. The hospital hall smelled like disinfectant and coffee, just like always. But the sound of every phone ring made me jump. I had been a nurse for 12 years, but that day every patient's voice sounded distant. My head was full of questions I could not answer. On my lunch break, I went out to my car and opened the little box again. There were receipts tucked in the corner gas stations, small stores all dated in. The week after John's supposed accident, they were paid with cash and signed with his handwriting. I traced my finger over his name and whispered, "You are alive, aren't you?" That night, another message came. It said, "There is a flash drive taped under the desk drawer. Read nothing yet. Keep it safe." I looked under the drawer, and there it was, a small black drive. I held it tight, afraid to plug it in, afraid not to. When Danny went to bed, I locked the door, closed the curtains, and opened John's laptop. The drive held a single folder marked "Truth." Inside were pictures of documents, letters, contracts from the construction company he worked for, and names that matched the list in the box. It looked like someone had been using company projects for something wrong: money, missing permits, forged, and the officer's name appeared on one of the papers. John must have found out. He must have tried to stop them, and then they tried to erase him. I sat there shaking, but for the first time in days, I also felt a quiet strength growing inside me. If he trusted me to find this, it meant he believed I could handle it. I whispered, "I won't let you down." I copied the files onto a hidden memory card and locked the flash drive back where I found it. The next morning, I noticed the black car again near the corner of our street. It left when I looked straight at it. Mrs. Hill came by with muffins and asked if I was sleeping any better. I smiled and said I was trying, but she touched my arm gently and said, "Honey, your eyes tell a different story." I wanted to tell her everything, but I heard John's words in my head, "Trust no one." So I just thanked her and watched her walk away. Later that afternoon, I went to the public library, pretending to use the computers for work. I printed copies of the documents and hid them in 3 different library books behind the back shelves. I felt like a spy in a movie, but it was the only way I could breathe, knowing there was backup somewhere safe. That evening, while washing dishes, I heard the crunch of tires outside. I looked out the window and saw the same black car parked across the street. A man inside pretended to read a newspaper, but his eyes kept glancing toward our house. I turned off the light so he couldn't see in and whispered to myself, "Don't be scared. He wants you to be scared, but you're stronger than this." At midnight, another message came. "I'm close. Can't call yet. Keep Danny safe. Trust your heart, not your fear." I felt tears roll down my cheeks. For the first time, I felt warmth behind the fear. He was out there somewhere, and he was still fighting. The next day, I packed a small bag for Danny, just in case. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew I had to be ready. I hid the memory card inside one of his toys, the little blue truck John gave him for Christmas. I told myself, if anything happens, at least that truth won't be lost. When the doorbell rang, I froze. It was Officer Miller standing there with that same practiced kind smile. He said, "Mrs. Parker, I'm just checking in, making sure you're managing okay." After the funeral, I forced a polite smile and said, "I'm trying. Thank you." He asked if he could come in. I said, "Danny's asleep. Maybe another time." His eyes lingered too long on the hallway behind me before he nodded and left. When I closed the door, my hands were shaking again. I could feel the truth circling me like a storm, but I wasn't that same broken woman from the funeral anymore. I was someone who had something to protect. I looked up at John's picture on the shelf and whispered, "Whatever this is, I will finish what you started. I promise." The morning after the officer came by, I woke up before sunrise and sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders. The air smelled like wet grass and coffee brewing in a neighbor's kitchen. I watched the light spread slowly across the street and tried to calm the storm inside my chest. I had spent the night replaying every word he said, every glance he gave. The way he looked down the hallway told me he was searching for something. I decided that fear was not going to own me anymore. I still had a child to protect and a husband to find. I whispered to myself, "You can do this, Grace, one breath, one step, one truth at a time." After I dropped Danny at school, I drove to John's old job site. The place looked quiet, a chain link fence around it and a sign that said closed for safety inspection. I parked nearby and asked one of the workers standing outside if he remembered John. He nodded, said, "Yeah, Parker, good man. Worked hard, disappeared right before things got messy." I asked what he meant, but he shook his head and said, "I don't know nothing, lady, best not to ask around here," then walked away fast. His words made my heart tighten. I stood there watching the wind move through the empty scaffolding and knew John had discovered something dangerous. I took a few photos of the site with my phone just to remember the layout in case it mattered later. That afternoon, I went back to the library again. It had become my quiet place. The sound of pages turning and the soft smell of paper felt safe. I logged into one of the public computers and searched for the names from the documents on the flash drive. Some were company partners. Others belonged to people who worked in local offices, and one name showed up connected to the city construction permits, the same department officer Miller used to work with before he joined the police. My pulse raced. It all connected somehow. I printed the information and hid the pages again in different books near the back of the history section. When I walked out of the library, I saw the black car again parked across the street. My body went cold. I turned away and walked calmly toward the grocery store, pretending not to notice my heart was pounding. But I remembered John's words, "Trust your heart, not your fear." So I breathed slow and steady, bought a bag of apples, and took a long way home through side streets. That evening, while Danny did his homework, I sat by the window pretending to read. The phone buzzed once. It was him. "You did well, keep records safe. We are close," I typed. "Where are you? Please let me see you." The reply came soon. "Maybe they stay brave. They are watching." I wanted to cry, but I smiled instead because I needed Danny to see strength, not fear. He looked up and said, "Mommy, when is Daddy coming home?" I swallowed the lump in my throat and said, "He's trying to find his way back to us, honey. And until he does, we keep believing." "Okay." He nodded and smiled, that small, innocent smile that kept me alive. Later that night, I heard a soft knock at the door. My heart stopped. I peeked through the curtain. It was Mrs. Hill. She held a small flashlight and looked worried. I opened the door a crack and she whispered, "Grace, I don't mean to scare you, but there was a man walking around your yard earlier wearing a dark jacket he left when I turned on my porch light. I just thought you should know." I thanked her and locked the door tight after she left. I checked every window twice and sat on the couch with the lights off, watching the street. The same black car rolled slowly past and disappeared around the corner. I stayed awake till morning the next day. I decided hiding wasn't enough. I had to understand what John was really involved in. I went through the photos again and noticed a detail I had missed before: a small logo printed on one of the folders, a triangle with the letters PDs inside. I searched it online and found it was a private security firm working with local law enforcement and city projects, the same firm that had recently been under quiet investigation for fraud. It hit me. Then John must have found proof of something they wanted, buried the company, the officer, the projects all linked together. I printed the information and saved the link on a small note folded in my shoe. Then I looked at myself in the mirror and said out loud, "You are not the same woman who stood crying at a funeral. You are stronger now. You are the one who will end this." That night the phone buzzed again. "Meet me tomorrow at tea." "He old Pier noon come alone." My hands shook, but I whispered to the dark, "Thank you, God, he's alive." I didn't know what waited for me there, but I knew I was going. I kissed Danny's forehead as he slept and promised I'd be back soon, even though I wasn't sure of anything anymore. As I stood by the window watching the night fade, I felt fear and hope twist together inside my chest for the first time since that message at the funeral. I felt a sense of purpose, stronger than fear. I didn't know if tomorrow would bring danger or truth, but I knew I would face it head on for love, for family, for courage. The morning of the meeting came with a strange kind of calm. The sky was soft and gray, and the world felt slow, like it was holding its breath. I dressed simply: jeans and a light jacket. Nothing that would draw attention. I kissed Danny goodbye, told him Mrs. Hill would take him to school and that I might be late picking him up. He asked where I was going, and I said, I have to take care of something important, sweetheart. He smiled and said, You always take care of everything, Mommy. I drove toward the coast, the road stretching quiet between empty fields. The air smelled of salt as I neared the water. My heart was beating so loud it felt like thunder in my chest. I parked near the old wooden pier where John used to take us fishing on weekends. The boards creaked under my feet as I walked slowly toward the end of the pier. The waves below crashed gentle and endless. For a moment I thought no one would come. Then I saw a man in a dark hoodie standing near the railing. His back to me. I froze, afraid to move, afraid to hope. Then he turned slightly and my breath caught. It was him, John. His hair was longer, his face thinner, but those eyes I could never mistake. I whispered his name and the wind almost carried it away. He turned fully now and I saw tears in his eyes. He took a step closer and said softly, Keep your voice low, Grace. We don't have much time. I wanted to run to him to hold him, but something in his tone stopped me. His face showed love and fear. All at once I said, John, what happened? They said you were gone, and he shook his head. No time to explain everything, yet they tried to make it look that way because I found something I shouldn't have. I asked who are they, and he said the company, the officer, and some people behind them. They were taking money from public projects using fake permits. I found files they wanted destroyed. I hid them before they could get to me. They planned to silence me, but I got away barely. He looked over my shoulder, scanning the pier like someone might be watching. I asked, Why didn't you come home? He said, They're watching the house. I couldn't risk you or Danny, but you did everything right. You found the key, the box, you kept it safe. I knew you would. Tears rolled down my face. I wanted to tell him everything I'd been through, the nights without sleep, the fear, the messages, but all I could say was, I missed you so much. He smiled faintly and said, I missed you too, more than I can say, but we have to finish this. There's a man in the city who can help. He's from the federal office, honest and clean. If we can get the proof to him, we can end this for good. He handed me a small envelope. It looked worn and thin. Inside was a memory card and a note that said, For Agent Cole. He said, Grace, keep this safe till tomorrow at noon. Meet him at the courthouse steps. Give it only to him, no one else. I'll find a way to follow when it's safe. If something happens, trust your heart. You've always been stronger than me. I wanted to argue to tell him to come home. But before I could speak, he touched my hand and said quietly, Someone's coming, I have to go. He turned and walked quickly down the pier, disappearing into the fog before I could even breathe out his name. I stood there alone, staring at the empty path. The wind was cold against my face, but my heart felt warm because now I knew he was alive. And fighting, I held the envelope to my chest and whispered, I will finish this, John, I promise. Driv, ing home. I noticed the same black car again. A few cars behind it stayed back, never close enough to see the driver. I turned off into a small diner and parked. I sat inside pretending to drink coffee while watching the car through the window. After a while, it drove away. When I got home, Mrs. Hill had Danny playing in the yard. She waved and said, Everything okay, honey? You look pale. I smiled weakly and said, Just tired. Thank you for watching him. She said, Always, sweetheart. You're stronger than you think. That night, I hid the envelope inside an old cereal box in the kitchen cupboard. I didn't sleep much. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Every shadow made my heart jump, but I kept reminding myself this was almost over, just one more day. At dawn, I packed Danny's lunch, kissed his cheek, and whispered, I love you no matter what happens. He smiled and ran off to school. I waited until the street was quiet, then took the envelope and drove toward the courthouse. The city looked normal, people walking to work, cars honking, but to me, everything felt sharpened, like every corner held a secret. I parked across the street and waited. The clock on the dashboard ticked closer to noon. My palms were sweating and my heartbeat felt like a drum. Then my phone buzzed, one short message, Be careful, someone knows. I looked around, scanning the faces. Passing by, one man stood out, tall, dark coat, sunglasses, though it wasn't sunny. He was watching me. I gripped the envelope tighter, whispered, You'll be proud of me, John, and stepped out of the car. The courthouse looked taller than I remembered. white stone shining under the noon sun and wide steps that made everyone walking up seem small. I held the envelope close against my chest and tried to steady my breathing. The message still echoed in my mind. Someone knows. I didn't know who sent it. Maybe John, maybe someone else. But I couldn't turn back now. I looked around trying to spot someone who looked like the man John mentioned, Agent Cole. I didn't know what he looked like, but I hoped I would feel it somehow, like I would just know who to trust. The crowd moved around me. People in suits, coffee in their hands, phones pressed to their ears, life going on like nothing was wrong. I stood still for a long moment until I saw a man in a gray suit standing by the fountain. He wasn't talking to anyone, just watching quietly, holding a file under his arm. He looked calm, steady, not like the others. I walked up slowly and said softly, "Are you Agent Cole?" He looked at me for a second, then nodded once and said, "You must be Grace Parker." His voice was low, calm, like someone who had seen danger but still believed in good. I took a shaky breath and handed him the envelope. He opened it just enough to see the memory card inside, then slipped it into his pocket and said, "You did the right thing, Grace. This will help more than you know." Before I could reply, someone shouted from across the street. It was a deep, sharp voice. "Stop right there." The man in the dark coat from earlier was running toward us, pulling something from his jacket. Agent Cole grabbed my arm and pulled me behind a pillar. "Stay down," he said firmly. The next few moments blurred people, screaming footsteps, echoing tires, screeching. I heard the sound of something metal clattering on the ground, and then silence. When I looked up, the man in the coat was gone. The street looked normal again, like nothing had happened. Agent Cole helped me stand and said, "We need to move you somewhere safe. Right now, come with me." He guided me toward a nearby car, and I followed, though my legs felt weak, like the world was spinning. We drove through side streets until the courthouse was far behind. I stared out the window, hands trembling. He finally said, "You're brave, Grace. Your husband trusted the right person. The files he found proved the company's fraud and the officer's involvement. It's going to take time, but now we have the truth." I asked, "Will they come after us again?" He said, "Maybe, but now they'll be the ones running." He pulled over near a small park and turned to me. "Look, I can't tell you everything yet, but your husband was working with us before it all went wrong. He tried to protect you and your son, and it nearly cost him his life. He's still in danger, but we're doing everything to bring him home safe." Hearing those words made my chest tighten. I asked, "Can I see him, please?" He hesitated, then said, "Soon, but not yet. He needs to stay hidden until we finish this. You have to stay low, too. No calls, no messages, not even from him for now." I nodded, tears rolling down my face, but I understood this wasn't just about us anymore. It was about truth and justice, something bigger than our pain. He dropped me near a quiet neighborhood and gave me a small card with just one number on it. "Call this only if you're in real danger. Otherwise, stay home and stay brave." I watched his car drive away and then walked slowly back toward Mrs. Hill's house. When I saw Danny waiting on the porch, his face lit up like sunlight. He ran into my arms shouting, "Mommy, I missed you so much." I held him tight and whispered, "I missed you too, baby boy. I'm home now." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window listening to the rain tapping softly against the glass. The world felt heavy but also clearer somehow, like I had crossed a line from fear into purpose. I whispered to the dark, "John, wherever you are, I'm still here and I'm not afraid anymore." The days passed slowly. I went through the motions of normal life, school, grocery, laundry, but always watching, always waiting. Sometimes I thought I saw the same car parked a few blocks away, then gone the next day, but I stopped letting fear control me. One morning, about a week later, I found a small note slipped under my door. It said, "Proud of you, Grace, soon." There was no name, but I knew who it was. My hands shook as I held it close and smiled through tears. That evening, the phone buzzed one last time, a new message, short and simple. "It's over, we're safe, I love you." I stared at the screen for a long time. The words didn't need proof or detail. I just knew they were true. The air felt lighter, my heart finally still. I went outside and watched the sunset fade over the quiet street, the sky painted gold and pink, like peace after a storm. I whispered, "Thank you, God, for giving me strength," and then softly said the words that carried me through it all. "Trust no one but love with everything you have. Because in the end, love was what saved us. Not fear, not revenge, just love, courage, and faith." It was early spring when I finally saw him again. The trees had just begun to bloom, and the air carried that soft promise of new beginnings. Danny was playing on the porch steps with his toy cars when a shadow stretched across the yard. He looked up and shouted, "Daddy," with a joy so pure that it broke something open inside me. I came running out of the house, my heart pounding harder than it ever had before. There he was, standing by the gate, looking tired, but alive. His face was thinner, his beard rough, but those same gentle eyes looked at me, and I knew right then that no nightmare could last forever. I couldn't even speak. I just walked to him slowly, like I was afraid he would disappear again. He smiled, that small, crooked smile that always made me feel safe, and said softly, "I told you I'd find my way back, Grace. I promised you, didn't I?" I nodded, and before I knew it, I was in his arms. His heartbeat was strong and steady against mine. I felt tears run down my face. But this time they weren't from fear. They were from relief, from love, from the simple truth that we had made it through the storm together. Danny hugged his father's leg, giggling and talking all at once, telling him about school, about Mrs. Hill, about how Mommy was brave and never stopped looking for him. John looked at me over Danny's head, his eyes shining, and whispered, "He gets that from you." We spent that whole day together just being a family again. No big words, no heavy talk, just laughter and warm food, and the kind of quiet peace that fills a home when you've been through. Geez, too much darkness. When night came and Danny finally fell asleep, John and I sat on the porch watching the stars. I asked him what happened after the courthouse. He told me how the investigation went through, how Agent Cole and his team uncovered everything, the fraud, the fake permits, the money trails, the people behind it were arrested, and the ones who tried to silence him were finally exposed. He had been kept in a safe place until it was over. He looked down at his hands and said, "I thought I lost everything, Grace, but you kept believing, you kept fighting. Even when I couldn't, I smiled and said, 'You're my home.' John, and home is something I don't give up on." For a long time we just sat there in silence, letting the night wrap around us. There was no need for promises anymore. We both knew what mattered and what didn't. We had already learned the hardest lesson life could teach, that strength doesn't mean never being scared. It means standing tall even when your heart is shaking. In the days that followed, life began to feel normal again, though normal meant something new now. It meant walking through fear and still finding beauty. It meant being grateful for the smallest moments, Danny's laughter, the smell of morning coffee, the sound of John's footsteps coming down the hall. We moved to a quieter town near the coast, a place where the sea touched the sky and the wind carried no secrets. We bought a small house with a big porch and a garden where Danny could play. I started working at the local library again, surrounded by books and peace. John fixed boats at the marina, his hands always busy, his heart finally free. Sometimes when the sun set, we would sit together by the shore and talk about everything we had survived. He would take my hand and say, "You were the brave one. Grace, you never gave up." And I would smile and say, "Maybe, but we both know it was love that saved us." One evening, as the tide rolled in, Danny pointed at the horizon and said, "Look, Mommy, the sky is gold." I looked out and felt tears fill my eyes because it was true. The world felt golden again, not perfect, not easy, but real and alive and full of hope. I whispered, "Thank you, God, for bringing him back, for giving me the courage to believe when everything looked lost." And in that moment, I knew our story wasn't about fear or danger or loss. It was about faith. It was about a woman who refused to let darkness win and a man who fought his way back to the light. It was about the power of love that no storm could destroy. So whenever I think back to that day at the funeral when the message came and my whole world fell apart, I don't feel pain anymore. I feel gratitude because that message didn't just save his life, it saved mine too. It taught me to trust my heart, to fight for what is right, and to love without fear. And that is how we found our way home. It has been 3 years since that day when everything changed, and yet sometimes it still feels like yesterday. I still remember the cold wind at the funeral, the message that started it all, and the fear that used to live in my chest. But now when I think of it, I do not feel pain anymore. I feel peace, I feel gratitude, I feel strength. We live a simple life now by the sea, where the mornings begin with birds singing and the evenings end with the soft whisper of waves. I work part-time at the library and help kids learn to read. I see in their small, bright faces the same hope that once pulled me through the darkest nights. John works at the marina, still his hands rough, but his smile gentle. Danny is taller now, curious and kind, with that same spark of courage that saved us all. Sometimes we talk about what happened, but only to remind ourselves how far we have come. I tell him the story in pieces, not the fear or danger, but the lessons, the way faith can light a path when everything else is dark, the way love can hold you together when the world tries to break you apart, the way one brave choice can change the ending of an entire story. There are days when the sky turns gray and rain hits the windows, and I remember how lost I once felt, how small and helpless. But then I look around and see what grew from that pain, and I realize that broken things can still become beautiful again, that scars can turn into signs of survival, not shame. Mrs. Hill still lives next door. She visits, often brings fresh cookies, and tells me I should write everything down so people can hear it. I always laugh and tell her maybe one day, but deep down, I know she is right, because if my story can help even one woman find her courage, then every tear, every sleepless night, every risk will have been worth it. Sometimes when I walk by the ocean, I think about all the women who are still living their quiet battles, the ones who smile through fear and keep their families together while the world feels too heavy. I wish I could tell them you are stronger than you know, you are braver than your fear, you can rebuild even from ashes. Because courage is not loud, courage is quiet. Courage is the way your hands still make breakfast when your heart is breaking. The way you hold your child close and whisper that everything will be okay, even when you are not sure yourself. Courage is showing up again and again until the pain becomes purpose. On John's birthday, we go to the pier, the same pier where I saw him that foggy morning. I bring flowers, and we stand there watching the waves and thanking God for a second chance. We do not talk much. We just hold hands and listen to the sea breathing around us, and I always whisper the same words. Thank you for finding your way back home. That day taught me that even when the world tells you to trust no one, you must still trust yourself. Trust your heart, your faith, your love, because those are the things that can never be taken away. Those are the things that will guide you when everything else disappears. So if anyone ever asks me what this story is about, I tell them it is about a woman who thought she had lost everything and found herself instead. It is about the quiet power of love that never stops believing, and about the kind of bravery that lives in every woman, even when she does not see it yet. And every night when the house is still and the moonlight touches the walls, I whisper one last prayer. Thank you for the storms that showed me my strength. Thank you for the message that changed my life. Thank you for bringing me home. Because in the end, the truth is simple. I was never really alone, and neither are you. The end.